wasn't until we'd been here some time this morning, Brian pointed it out to me, that I realised the school has taken down the barriers to the area where we used to park. I just went ahead and parked, not realising there were no barriers up. So what that means is next week, if it continues that way, we can park further up again. I'm using a bit of foreign language today, and I'll explain that in a while. It could be said that money is a tool to be used and not something merely to be set aside and saved. And you can see that in the Old Testament character Job. If you read the first chapter of the book of Job, you'll find that Job was an extremely wealthy person, but he didn't keep his assets to himself. In the passage that Boone read to us a few moments ago from Job chapter 29, we see that Job used his assets to be of help to many others. In that passage that Boone read, it says that Job helped the poor, orphans, those who were at death's door, widows, the blind, the lame, and victims of evil people. There is a French saying which I use from time to time. It's this saying here, Noblesse Oblige. The Pocket Oxford Dictionary gives this meaning: privilege entails responsibility. Webster's New World Dictionary gives this definition: the obligation of people of high rank or social position to be kind and generous. In other words, there's the idea here that if we are blessed, we have the responsibility to help other people. You've got a hint of that in Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 11. There's various applications of this verse, but I'll just read it. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. And that can have a negative application, but it also ties in with the idea that the more we have, the more that we can do to help other people. Come over to 1 Kings chapter 5 and verses 5 and 6. Here we go back to the time of King Solomon, 1 Kings chapter 5, beginning in verse 5. And although Solomon had not asked for great wealth, God nevertheless gave him considerable wealth, very great wealth. But Solomon also had responsibilities. To him, for instance, was given the responsibility of building the temple. And although materials for the temple had been set aside during the reign of Solomon's father, King David, nevertheless, there was still considerable expense to be faced. 1 Kings chapter 5, verses 5 and 6, Solomon here is speaking to Hiram, king of Tyre. He says, "Now then, issue orders that they cut cedars from Lebanon for me, and my servants will be with your servants, and I will give you wages for your servants in accordance with all that you say. For you yourself know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians." So Solomon here was saying to Hiram, I need timber. You guys are great at providing that. I will provide wages to your workers to provide the timber. We go down to 1 Kings 5 and verse 13. Now King Solomon conscripted forced labourers from all Israel, and the forced labourers numbered 30,000 men. Then he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They were to be in Lebanon for a month and 2 months at home. And Adoniram was in charge of the forced labourers. Now Solomon had 70,000 porters and 80,000 stonemasons in the mountains. And besides Solomon's 3,300 chief deputies who were in charge of the project and ruled over the people who were doing the work. So huge numbers of workers here involved in this project, and they had to be paid and they had to be fed and so forth. So Solomon had great wealth coming in, but as I say, he also had considerable expenses to meet. And neither you nor I are in the same financial category as Job or King Solomon. Nevertheless, there is an application in all of this for us, an application. There is a sense in which God expects us to spend what we receive rather than keeping it all to ourselves. And the challenge lies in meeting that responsibility. Because of the policies upon which our national economy is based, we are urged to work as much as we can, to earn as much as we can, in order to spend as much as we can, thereby allowing manufacturers to produce and sell as much as they can. So they really want as many people as possible in Australia to be there working, earning and spending. Now, for those of us who are older, that goes a little bit against what we were taught when we were young. Some of us will remember the school banking system. I don't know if such a thing exists anymore. But you might remember that representatives from the Commonwealth Bank would come to primary schools and they would talk to classes about spending, about saving rather, and you would get a Commonwealth Bank metal money box designed to look like a Commonwealth Bank building. And the message back then was to save, but the message now is to spend. I hope I said that right. The message back then was to save. The message now is to save. I am struggling here. We were taught to save. Now we're told to spend. And if you don't have the cash, if you don't have the savings, then you've got credit cards, and you can spend on credit cards. And all of this is built upon materialism. But although based upon principles other than materialism, the Bible does, in a way, also promote this idea of earning and spending. Come over to Ephesians 4 and verse 28. Ephesians 4 and verse 28. Paul here is talking about the change there needs to be when people become Christians. They need to change from past behaviours. And thus he says, Ephesians 4 and verse 28, the one who steals must no longer steal, but rather he must labour, producing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with the one who has need. So Paul says, if you were stealing before, if you're taking from others, don't do that anymore. Instead of taking from others, work yourself so that you earn and you have something to share with others, so that you can be a giver rather than be a taker. Think if you go through the New Testament, and probably the Old Testament as well, you will find reference to various areas of spending. For instance, there's basic personal needs such as food and covering in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 8. And the word covering there translates a Greek word which refers to both clothing and housing. There's care of family, particularly the care of people in the family, such as widows who might not have an income themselves. Back in those days, there was no widows' pensions. That's all in 1 Timothy chapter 5. There's payment of taxes and other government charges in Romans 13. There's even reference to medical costs in Luke 10 and also in Mark chapter 5. And in Matthew chapter 20, the first 14 verses there, we've got the need to pay others. If we have a business, of course, we've got to pay others. You might bring somebody in to do some work for you. Again, you've got the responsibility of paying them. And then on top of that, there's also references to what we might call various church-related areas of giving. Help of poor and needy Christians, support of preachers, teachers, elders, support of missionaries, giving to enable the church to support widows. There would be widows who didn't have any family. The church would support them. Well, the resources had to be provided for that to be done. Giving to provide help in special cases of need. For instance, the Gentile churches in Galatia, Macedonia and Achaia gave to help needy Christians back in Jerusalem and the surrounding region. Acts chapter 11, the church in Syrian Antioch sent funds down to Jerusalem, which was being faced by famine. There was Philippians chapter 4 and verse 18, where the Philippian church sent help to Paul, who was in prison in Rome, and so it goes on. Now, if you put that all together, that's only covering part of the expenses that we face these days. Today we've got matters like school fees, motor vehicle expenses, various types of insurance, electricity, water rates, council rates. Some of you might have gas, so you've got those rates as well, and so the list goes on. And at the same time, we're dealing with inflation, as you all know. Housing costs have gone through the roof. There's also ongoing rises in medical insurance, in petrol, in groceries, and all of those sorts of things. So the question is, how do we meet all of these costs, including church-related giving? One possible answer is stop your giving to the church, or reduce it to the bare minimum. That is a possibility. But of course, there are matters to consider in regard to that. For instance, we go over to Luke chapter 14, and I'll read there from verse 27, Luke 14 and verse 27. This is Jesus speaking. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who are watching it will begin to ridicule him, saying, this person began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to face the one coming against him with 20,000? Otherwise, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and requests terms of peace. And what Jesus is saying here is that Christians must make sacrifices if we are to follow Jesus Christ, and we need to weigh up things. We need to weigh up priorities and ask ourselves, are we willing to make sacrifices? And this means that we have to think about what we face as Christians, the responsibilities. I've already read them: help of poor and needy Christians, support of preachers and teachers and elders, support of missionaries, giving to enable the church to support widows, and giving to provide help in special cases of need. And this raises a point. All things being equal, it means that Christians face responsibilities which other people do not face, generally speaking. Now, I know there's some very generous people out there who do not belong to any church, but they are very generous in helping various charities. But we do have God-given responsibilities as Christians, which many others might not have. And so we might not be able to afford the things that some other people are able to afford. Because we have this responsibility of giving, we might not be able to afford the sort of cars that other people afford. If you're into it, we can't afford the jet skis, we can't afford the annual overseas holidays, we can't afford the quality furniture, we can't afford the outings, the concerts, all of those sorts of things that other people might well be able to afford. Are we going to resent that? As Jesus says, discipleship involves decisions about priorities. But on the other hand, keep this in mind. God calls us to give as we are able, and he doesn't turn up his back upon us if we can't give as much as somebody else. Again, here in Luke, we'll go this time to Luke chapter 21, the example of the poor widow. And this begins with reference to Jesus. Luke 21 and verse 1. He looked up and saw the wealthy putting their gifts into the temple treasury, and saw a poor widow putting in 2 lepta coins. Now, the footnote here in my Bible says that a lepta coin was the smallest Greek copper coin, about 1/128th part of a labourer's daily wage. So it was less than 1% of a labourer's daily wage. She gave 2 lepta, so about a 60th part of a daily wage. She gave all that she had. Jesus said in verse 3, truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them, for they all contributed to the offering from their surplus, but she from her poverty put in all that she had to live on. She gave tiny amount in one sense. That's all she had. But God saw that that was something much greater than what wealthy people were giving. Why? Because she gave all that she could afford and more. You've got various references to this. There's a passage in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 2 that we have here regularly in regard to giving on Sundays. 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2, on the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper. So some do not earn as much as others, so some give more, some give less. 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 12, the same message there. For if the willingness is present, it is acceptable according to what a person has, not according to what he does not have. So God sees the ability. Some of us have a greater ability to give than others. But what are we giving of what we can give? Now, this doesn't rule out sacrificial giving. In fact, that's right there here in 2 Corinthians 8, beginning in verse 1. Now, brothers, we make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches of Macedonia, that there in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. For I testify that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave voluntarily, begging us with much urging for the favour of participating in the support of the saints. And you think back to that poor widow in the book of Luke. She only had a fraction of what others had, but she gave what she had. She gave sacrificially. So we don't just sit back and say, well, I don't earn as much as somebody else, so therefore I'm not going to give. That's not the idea. The idea is we give what we can from what we have, even at times perhaps giving sacrificially. Now, given the fact that we have a range of expenses, given the fact that some of us may have jobs which pay less than others, given the fact that some of us may be even on pensions, how can we manage financially And how can we engage in the various forms of giving which are related to being a Christian? And here in this regard, you could say, well, we're talking about basic money management, and that really applies whoever you are. You might be a Christian, you might not be a Christian. Money management still enters into the situation, and from my experience when I used to work in finance, I know that there are a lot of people who really don't know how to manage money, but there are many areas of help there. I can't cover all the details of money management, but there are books, there are websites, there are financial counselors who are able to sit down with people, particularly people who might be facing serious and ongoing financial difficulties. There is a lot of help available out there. But in the rest of this lesson, I want to just talk about a few basic practical points, particularly some which will apply to us as Christians. And I want to say this as well. Sometimes financial worries drag us down. We face bill after bill after bill, mortgage rates, rents are going up, and we find ourselves struggling. And Lavinia and I have been through that at times, and even before I got married, there were times when I was really struggling. But there is hope here. When you have young children, well, when you have children, full stop, be them young teenagers or whatever, you know that there's constant ongoing expenses. Children grow quickly. There's always the need for new, bigger clothes and new shoes and so forth, and all the other costs that come with parenting, and that seems to go on and on. But as children grow older and leave home, then that area of expense declines. As you grow older, as you gain more experience, and as you upskill, develop more work-related skills, you may be able to increase your income by getting promotions or transferring to better paying jobs. And also keep in mind that the time does come when some major expenses are no longer. You pay off your car loan, you pay off your mortgage even. And so there is light at the end of the tunnel. Life goes in stages, as I've said, at other times. So we don't think that it's just going to be never ending. But what are some basic considerations here? Well, first, let's consider some things to do. The first thing would be to set financial priorities. What are the most important expenses that we need to meet? Budget for them. I'll come to that in a moment. But sometimes we spend on a whole lot of other things, and when the big bills come, we're just not ready for them. The second point here is learn the difference between needs and wants. Come over to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through to 8. We've got to learn the difference between essentials and non-essentials. 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, but godliness is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, and so we cannot take anything out of it. If we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. We can't take everything with us when we die. So if you just want to accumulate things for the sake of accumulating things, consider, is that a hobby or a necessity? Yes, again, we can afford things, and we can learn to spend wisely, and we can find some good buys, and not good buys in saying goodbye, but some economical purchases. But nevertheless, we need to weigh up what is really important and necessary. That's a chief thing to keep in mind when we're spending. To work out a budget, number 3 here. If you work out a budget, you can know what income you have, you can know what expenses that you are facing, and that can let you know what you can and you can't afford. It can let you know that some things you're going to have to put off for a while. It also, if you do budget, allows you to set money aside for some big periodic payments. Sometimes we face monthly, quarterly, or even annual payments. Well, you know, it's like we still pay the house insurance, the car insurance on an annual basis, registration costs, third-party costs in regard to car. These are annual payments. You can actually pay them monthly if you want to, and they don't charge extra for that, many companies now. But all right, if I know that I've got a big expense coming, then if I keep a budget, I know that I've got to set aside X amount of dollars for that to have that money ready. So budgeting is a good thing, and I'll say something a bit more later. Spend according to what you have. Buy what you can afford now. The more expensive items can wait until later. I remember early in our marriage with Lavinia and I, we bought furniture a lot of times that was made of particle board and covered with a veneer, things like wardrobes and so forth. Now that stuff wears out very quickly, and I remember thinking, okay, I looked forward to a time when we could buy decent wooden furniture that would last, and we reached that point. But at the time, we bought the sort of furniture that we could afford. And along with this, there's also the need to be self-disciplined with spending, and that means saying no to certain items and sticking with that. And we're talking here about the concept of delayed gratification versus instant gratification. Sometimes, you know, we say to ourselves, I want this and I want something now. And advertising works on that. Pick up your phone now and dial such and such a number. No, we need to be self-disciplined, and if it's not something urgent, then learn to put it off until we can better afford it. But there's something else that I want to keep in mind here, and that is, do keep God in the picture. Come over to Matthew chapter 6, verses 31 to 33. I know that finances can be a struggle and it can really drag us down. And again, I've been through that. But God is in the picture here. Matthew chapter 6, verse 31, Jesus speaking. Do not worry then, saying, what are we to eat? Or what are we to drink? Or what are we to wear for clothing? For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be provided to you. Put God and his kingdom first in your life, and there is a God there who will look after you. And I have to say, in my experience, that has happened. Another passage in line with that is over in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse 6. This is with chapter 8, a passage in regard to church giving. 2 Corinthians 9, beginning in verse 6. Now I say this, the one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. The one who sows generously will also reap generously. Each one must do just as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace overflow to you, so that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. As it is written, he scattered abroad, he gave to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in everything for all liberality, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. The message here is, if you're a follower of God who is a giver, God also is a giver. and God will provide. What about some don'ts? Number one, don't think that you need to have the latest model of everything or the best of everything. You don't need to have the latest smartphone or the latest piece of computer technology. You don't have to have the best furniture, the best clothes, all of those things. Second point, don't engage in impulse buying. Spur of the minute, so spur of the moment buying. You know, you go into a shop to buy one thing and then you see something, oh, that looks nice, and you grab that. Oh, there's something on sale, I'll grab that. Again, learn self-control. Don't rely on credit to purchase things you can't afford right now. That's credit cards. You know, some people run a string of credit cards and run them all to the max. Then there's also things like short-term loans. There is a company that advertises on TV, Wallet Wizard. The idea is, oh, you've got a problem, right, ring right now, and you can have the money you need. That has its problems. Oftentimes it's higher interest rates and so forth. Do you really need to spend on something right now? Don't get involved in get-rich schemes, thinking that'll solve your problems. Bitcoin was something that was popular. I've never understood what Bitcoin is. Shares, sometimes you see a certain share going up and you think, boy, I'll get on top of that. And I've seen that done, and what happens? Shares can also go down, and sometimes go down very quickly. So don't get into quick rich schemes. Don't make yourself miserable. And I want to give this as a positive point here. Sometimes you can become so tight on money, so money conscious all the time, that you just don't know how to enjoy life, and you can make it miserable for your wife, your husband, your children, or whatever. There are ways of enjoying life without having to spend big amounts of money. It's important to do that as well. Balance your life so that, okay, yes, you do exercise self-control in various ways, but realize there are ways to just get out there and enjoy what God has provided. Sunshine is free. Countryside is free. The ocean is free. Go for a walk. Just go and have a coffee somewhere. Oh, that costs a lot. All right, go to McDonald's. Your wife would be thrilled. Right, this fortnight we're going to McDonald's for a coffee. Yeah, you know what I'm getting at. Don't become such a tightwad that life is miserable around you. Now, I prepared some notes on this last year, some guidelines on looking after your money, budgeting. I provided a sample budget there. And Brian has made that material available. You might have received that during the week. So that is there for you. And as I say, there's a lot of other help that is available, and I'm aware that you can be at times in difficulties. And the idea is, look, talk to others. Don't get yourself into huge debt that you can't manage. You know, some people have a garage or a workshop that is full of tools. As for me, apart from garden tools, nearly all of my tools can fit into a plastic shopping bag. You know, I've been an adult for over 40 years. The number of tools that I've accumulated is probably a couple of dozen. And most of those are screwdrivers, a couple of hammers. And I get by with those. Why? Because I'm not very skillful manually, and because I'm not really interested in manual things. So it's no good giving me tools. It's no good me accumulating a workshop full of tools because I ain't going to use them. They're not important as far as expenditure goes. But keep this in mind, money is a tool. A lot of people don't realise that. Money is a tool. And if used wisely, it can be used to achieve a lot of good, including serving God. Now, we're not there to accumulate money in various bank accounts and high interest accounts and so forth just for the sake of accumulating money. Like tools, money is there to be used. Now, from a Christian perspective, you could say that money is there to be used to serve God, to look after ourselves and our families, to help others, to pay government taxes for community services. And that is important. We don't like paying taxes, but nevertheless, we benefit from a lot of the things that government does. And there will be times when life is hard and finances are tight. The Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes does talk about that. But if we put God and his kingdom first and work as we should to earn a living, then God has promised to help us through. I came across this statement in my files. It comes from a church newsletter. A London newspaper offered a prize for the best definition of money. The winning definition was this: money is an instrument that can buy you everything but happiness and pay your fare to every place but heaven. Money can be very useful, but money ain't everything. Don't let money come between you and God. Don't be so unwise with your money that you make your and your family's life miserable. Put God first. Use your money the way he wants you to. Learn how to use money wisely. God will look after you. Let's stand and sing.